Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about The Bondsman, the television series starring Kevin Bacon as an undead bounty hunter. It's currently streaming on Amazon Prime, and all 8 episodes dropped just 10 days ago on April 3rd. I'm excited to welcome back 2 returning guests. First, costume designer Liz Vastola. Liz, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Also joining us is production designer Eve McCarney. Great to see you again, Eve.
Hey, Skid. Glad to be here.
And joining me in the co-host chair again this week is Gianni Damaia. Gianni, glad to have you with us.
Always happy to be here, Skid.
Warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers. The 8 episodes are about 30 minutes each. You can binge the whole thing, then come back and join us. Let's dive right in. Ladies, tell me how you both got involved in this project.
So I was finishing up a feature in Syracuse when I got a call from my agent about The Bondsman. And I actually read the scripts while still on the ground there and started the mood boards, etc., from Syracuse. And then I interviewed when I got back to LA. And that's when I met Granger David, the creator, and Eric Olson, our showrunner. And from there were several more interview rounds, and then I got the job.
Liz, how about you?
Yeah, I had worked with Eric Olson before. We did the 3rd season of Daredevil, the Netflix version, together, and we just continued to stay in touch. And then he let me know about this project. And, you have to go, even though I'd worked with Eric before, you have to go through all the rounds with Blumhouse, Amazon, etc. But yeah, went well, and we made the 1st season.
And neither of you have worked together before. Is that true? Did you guys meet on this show?
Yes, we met on the show. It was great.
Yeah.
Now, give me a sense of the production calendar. How much prep did you have? When was the filming done? Just a general sense of what kind of time was involved.
They brought me on kind of early, which is, I'll say at the front, is very unusual. I had close to 16 weeks of prep. We wanted to have all the permanent sets designed when we landed because we only had 10 weeks on the ground. So that way we had the 10 weeks to build the 4 permanent sets, one of which was the compound, which was a massive undertaking. And then for shooting, we started shooting in March and we finished at the end of May. And then we came back in June to prep reshoots that we shot in July.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, we had been chatting about this maybe like it was the fall before, it was like August or so, and then I was put on like a soft hold for it, which I was able to do like some R&D for a couple of months before even going down to Georgia. So, and then in Georgia, I think I had something like 8 weeks or more of prep, which on this type of show was, like Eve said, really rare and luxurious. I mean, obviously, it always things change last minute and then you feel like you had no time. But yeah, I think the extended prep process was really helpful and a delight, really.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we scouted Georgia the August before. So that's when I went on the first scout. So we were pretty far ahead of it, which was really nice. I think it really helped the show look as good as it does.
I had a question specifically about the compound because there's a couple different sort of places within it, I guess to say, or a couple different like major scenic locations. There's that sort of like jail-esque portion of it, which has obviously like a sort of major action set piece. And then, as Hub is sort of, meandering around through most of it, it's obviously tied to, his like living situation, I guess you could say. And then there's, of course, the actual house itself, like across the way. Are those all actually on that location? Did you build out those sets to be as seamless as they seem in the show, or are those all different sets that you built?
It's a little bit of a combo of that. So we built the compound, the exterior parts on a road leading up to the stages that we shot at, which was really great because we wanted a real road. So it felt like a real gas station before it became the Bond shop. But that was the exterior shell only. And then we had a little bit of scenic on the inside so you could look out into the real world. But when you look in, it wasn't finished. Kitty's house, on the other hand, that porch was fully built out on location. Obviously, it is exterior, and the house itself inside was not finished. So we would shoot all those exterior beats there, and then we would move to stage to shoot the interior Bond shop. But the interior bond shop, yes, was all built as one piece, and it was meant to be kind of like in an oval shape where you had many entrances and exits, so you could kind of have these continuous paths for the demon fights or, the walk and talks that we wanted to do. And it gave all the directors new things to work with. We really wanted to make sure that by the last director that we hadn't shot all the angles and that there were new things to do inside of the set.
Yeah, it felt like an ever-evolving space. So I think that kind of caters to the vision that you're describing there.
Yes, and without the prep, it wouldn't be what it is. Because I started with hand sketches that Eric responded to, and they evolved before we moved into the actual set design process. And that was really wonderful. And like Liz said, luxurious. That's so unusual to have that kind of time to go through that many rounds of revisions on a set before you actually hit the set design phase. So I think it really benefited the story and the characters.
When you talk about building those exteriors on the way up to your stages, are these studio lots? You talk about filming in Georgia, and so we're outside Atlanta, but you guys are about 45 minutes to an hour from the city proper.
The stages we shot at are the Walking Dead stages. It's AMC used to own them. I don't think they do anymore. It's called Riverwood. So they're not the nicest, newest stages, but they've been around for a while. They had been there for 20 years or more, rooted down in the South there. So we had everything we needed. The facilities, were great. We had our stages, we had our paint shop, we had our mill, we had our production offices. And leading into the stages, you had two large parking lots for extras or for any sort of base camps. And one of those is what we turned into our compound location. So it just worked out that they owned the property, but it was outside of the stages. Once the trees grew in, you couldn't see the stages, but when the trees were bare, you could. So that was a bit of a scramble to block for the beginning of shooting because the trees had not fully come in March. But it really worked out. I thought it was a great resource for us because we were supposed to be in northern Georgia in Appalachia, and we scouted a stage in Atlanta, and it didn't have the grounds, the woods, the lakes. It didn't have any of that stuff that existed at Riverwood. So it was really the perfect fit for our show and what we needed.
Additionally, which is almost never the case for costume, is there was a full-on, the Walking Dead costume shop was, I mean, at that point vacant. And I think AMC had made the decision to also house a kind of a stock in much in the way Universal does and, Warner Brothers, Disney, etc. And there were, just like racks and racks of like multipliable costumes and things that had been broken down but not used, and a really kind of beefy age and dye space that we could use. And yeah, as a resource, especially in that area, it was pretty amazing.
This is so fun to just hear about because I feel like every time Skid and I are on these types of calls, it's always, people talking about how panicked and how constrained all the time frames were. And we're getting the exact opposite experience. So this is so fun.
Speaking to that, given that we had the extended prep, it was really helpful to land with the plans. But I will tell you, weather was not our friend. When we landed, it was 16 degrees when we were first picking where the compound was going to go and kind of measuring it out to where our stakes would not go into the ground. And then as we started to build, the rain started. And we were on a bit of a floodplain, so there was a lot of stuff that had to be done. When we were teching, there were piles of dirt around the compound. We were not that far out from shooting, so it was a race to the finish because of the weather. I think without the weather, we were in a really good spot, but that's the kind of stuff you can't plan for. So, and I'm sure Liz had her moments too with
Yeah.
all the last minute changes and things that happen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, especially I think when you're building a show from zero, based on a completely original idea, script, characters. I mean, it's everything is evolving until the last minute and even then some. But we were definitely, set up at least in the beginning to succeed, as much as possible, and I think that like that's something Eric, I remember that from Daredevil. He really does whatever he can to put the department heads in an advantageous position, even so much as putting me on a sort of, like preparatory retainer prior to coming to Georgia, just to sort of get the juices flowing. I mean, things like that are like just so Amazing.
We're starting the Eric fan club then, is what it sounds like.
Yes, carry the flag proudly.
I want to talk about some of the experience you guys both brought into this project. I mentioned you've both been on the podcast before. Liz, you were here and we talked about your work on Twisted Metal. And Eve, a little bit earlier than that, you were on to talk about American Horror Stories. Now, again, both of you have long resumes that cover a lot of various projects, but I'm curious how your genre experience was relevant for this project.
So I would be lying if I said I didn't think stories got me in the room for this, because, being anthology, it gave me so many different looks. They're basically like little mini features, right? And I did 15 of them. So I think that was really impressive to Eric and Granger both. I had met the line producer actually on an interview for a different project, and we didn't work together, but he brought my name into the project as well. So that was really wonderful. But I think the other thing that really helped me was Into the Dark. So that was one of Blumhouse TV's first projects. So there were a lot of familiar faces on that side that knew me, that I knew. And I think it felt comfortable for them when I came into the room and they're like, oh yeah, we know she can do this. Like she did this for us before on a smaller budget and a smaller project. But I think doing all of those different things where we veer into sci-fi, some stuff were thriller, some were drama. I have some period Western experience. I think all of that together gives me a certain point of view that is unique to me and my experiences that I brought to this project. Because, we're really trying to do a mashup. It's, country music and family drama, and it's dark comedy, and it's Southern crime, and it's, supernatural horror. So it's all of these things in one show, which was so exciting from a design perspective, but that I hadn't done myself. So it was really thrilling to be given the chance to design the show and use all of my experience.
I feel like it's funny because I had also previously worked with Blumhouse on The Purge, one of the Purge movies, which was so fun. But I think like Twisted Metal, The Purge, like there are a lot of sort of like larger than life stuff. And I think that but Daredevil kind of counteracted that to some extent, which was, I mean, Eric was felt so strongly about how grounded that show needed to feel, and I think what really served me best in the work I'd previously done is like all the kind of like really small but mighty little horror movies I did in New York, and working, with like all of Larry Fessenden's acolytes of like Jim Mickle and Ty West, and all of that kind of gritty, literal in the mud, horror stuff where you have to worry about the balance between what the production and script needs in terms of multiples, but then also not, maintaining a sense of like character and specificity and cinematic look, and so I think, doing that really early lower budget stuff where you're just kind of like, learning as you go, and you're always learning as you go, but I think that really helped me to, at the 11th hour be like, oh, actually we need this many more things for the thing that shoots tomorrow. And what do we do about this guy who's supposed to look like this, but we're in the middle of, Southern Georgia, and all those kind of problems you have to solve. I think, I'm sure Eve can attest to as well. You kind of like rack up your own encyclopedia in your brain of experience to kind of try and draw from.
And I think, Eve, you alluded to it earlier that this show really is a balancing act. At times goes very extreme in one direction or another, particularly with some of the horror elements, but you can't telegraph all of that, or these other real world elements aren't going to play right. And so, are there specific sets for you, Eve, or costumes for you, Liz, that you had to be very attuned to how that balance was going to play out?
Yes, I think for me, it would be Hub and Kitty's spaces, right? So the Bond shop, it had to have the history of being a garage at one point. Right? It was like his grandfather's garage that went down, and then it became a Bond shop in the 80s. There was a whole backstory that they wrote for us. So we understood the history of the characters and the places, which was really, really helpful. So I have an old logo on the wall that was faded, right? And we had a lot of the old auto stuff around, and then we added in all the office stuff for the Bond shop and the neons, and so it was a mix of all of these things and a mix of vintage stuff with some newer stuff. I didn't want everything to be vintage because it's not a time capsule, right? This is a business, and I do like vintage and we do lean that way, but we would have some newer IKEA tables or, just a mix. It's something that they just picked up because they needed it. And then his apartment being in what was the office of the garage, having a Murphy bed that was like a newer Murphy bed, right? But then it was a car seat for his living room sofa. Just mixing those elements so it felt very Hub. Like, what would Hub do? Well, he's not going to go out and buy a sofa. He's going to grab this back seat out of this old truck junker that's out in the yard, and throw that in there. And then leaving like the front gas check station the way it is, but maybe like having some of stuff piled up on there, like he's using it, and then turning the shelving unit into his kitchenette was really fun because he wouldn't build out something. He has a hot plate, he's got a kettle, and there's still old oil cans up above, but then he's got dishes, right? So it's this mix of things. So that was really fun. And then the second part being Kitty's porch was so important because she's really the heart of the family and the heart of the show, and she's what keeps him grounded. So having her porch really reflect her history and the history of their family, especially the music side of that, because that's where they play as a family. They play music together towards the end of the season, and it's such a moving scene. Having the right instruments for the place, for the people, their family specifically, was really important. So we went through a lot of rounds with our music supervisor and our props team and Eric, and figuring out what those should be to make sure that felt grounded in reality, and true to our characters as well.
For costume, I think that the family as a whole, I kind of thought of them as, very, very much earthbound, and needing to feel as, knowable and believable and realistic, so to speak, to kind of be a jumping off point for our more campier supernatural color bombs, basically, and all those, demons, etc. But even within the family, I mean, like there's Hub and Kitty, but then there's Cade, who's very much a teenager in present day. Of course, we wanted to feel timeless, as, I think a lot of television, contemporary television wants to feel. So with Marianne, she is kind of in both areas where sometimes she dips a little bit into her, when she's like staying over at Hub, she's wearing clothes that she probably left there a decade ago. When she's in the sort of the recording booth, it's something that feels a little more kicked up and country. And when she's, scraping the brains off of the floor in the garage, it's overalls. And so it's like she kind of is a go between, I think, between, let's say, like Hub and Kitty, or in one kind of frame of reference towards clothing, and Kate.
Speaking specifically about some of the costuming choices, because having met you previously on your work in Twisted Metal, and I remember us talking a little bit about like the high C shirt and stuff like that, just the little flourishes that you kind of add to different characters. And I was thinking about it intently when I was watching this show because there's a lot of those like just subtle, like sort of campy, fun nods that I feel like you threw in that I think are so ingenious and so ingrained
Oh,
in like what these characters are. I'm thinking specifically about like Kitty's mama bear on
yeah.
her her bondsman vest or whatever, and then the Damon Harriman character, he's got a couple of these like Russian mob tracksuits, but then he
Yeah.
always pairs it with this giant hat. And I was wondering if there were any other of those like fun little choices that maybe I didn't catch that you had sort of peppered in there that you want to draw attention to.
Oh, that's such a good question.
I've got one.
Let's see.
Peter's t-shirt.
Oh,
T-shirt with like the wolf like howling at the moon, like it was so
yeah. I sometimes wish we could see Tater a little more clearly, although Tater, uh, yeah, Tater, he always had a wolf t-shirt on. And I think one of those like throwback, early 90s, like howling at the moon kind of a thing. And it's funny, as he would continue to come in for fittings as the season went on, we'd always have a wolf t-shirt on deck, like, and we'd be like, should we? Yeah, maybe, yeah. And then we, show it to Eric, etc. And I'd be like, listen, I think we keep going with the wolf t the wolf And Eric is so game. Yeah, I have to think about some others. Damon, the character of Lucky Damon was so game, and that could have gone, you know, one way or the other. But I kind of, it was just, yeah. I'm really excited about how that turned out, and I think that like of course, we had a million hats. We had a million tracksuits, like just trying to find, and they were all, all the sort of things you don't see about them being tailored and this and that and what. But I remember Eric Olson was like, Lucky is kind of like if Bill Burr was down here. Like if Bill Burr and I really looked at Bill Burr like a lot, and we ended up there's one leather blazer that Lucky wears. I think it's in the second episode. I found an image of Bill Burr wearing this like navy leather blazer. I think it's in a press shot for something. And it just was so weird, like so awesome and strange, but also like, what are we? Yeah, it's like a really lovely tailored but navy leather blazer. And I could not find it anywhere. I mean, we couldn't where do you buy such a thing other than like, fast fashion and then it's made out of plastic? And this thing had to like, he had to fight in it. And I really believed in this. Like, I was like, this is odd in a good way. He can wear it with, like a 60s pant and a cowboy boot. And we ended up making it, which was such an undertaking and not a cheap one. And I just, I really am proud of that piece actually. And I'm so happy, that everybody agreed to pay for it because it was such a. I still to this day would when if I ever meet Bill, I'm going to ask him where he got that blazer. But yeah, like there were little, and I'm sure Eve, you felt the same way. When the show is so condensed and intimate, but also has these moments, these bigger, supernatural moments. Those little choices you make for us, a tighter cast, like a tighter space are so important. And sometimes you're just like, we're rolling the dice here a little bit and trusting intuition. And it's great when you feel like it works out.
I want to ask you guys about a specific scene where I saw both of your work sort of, I could see it even coming together, and that would be the swimming pool scene where we have this
And Elliot Rocket. Let's just
we have this demon in a yellow cheerleader outfit, but the room itself, the blue tinge and the water, and just again, you guys must have been thinking about this well before filming started about how this was going to play.
Yeah, absolutely. When the pool came into play, it really affected the color of the uniform, right, Liz? I
when
mean,
we were talking about it, I was like, I remember it like, well, what is this cheerleader outfit? And I immediately was like, well, what's the color of the pool? Like, what is the color in here? What is gonna, and it wasn't even, it was like, what is it gonna look like underwater? Because I think at this point, we've all seen so much underwater film, that some colors die and some colors live, let's say. And yeah, that was my, like literally, I think I marched straight to Eve and Elliot and was like, what is going to look the best underwater in this space? Because if we don't see it, if it's not one of these punchy, literally and figuratively moments, then it's going to fall away and not a, fun way.
I think we were looking at orange at one point too, right?
Yeah,
Yellow was was the right call. Just a little off the contrary color, right? The complementary color.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought it worked great. And we had to engineer that pool lane triangle. That was a whole thing between art department, special effects, and stunts, making sure that thing stayed put. And then we opted for a tonal version of that because a lot of those will have red, right? They'll be red, they'll be all different ones. We went blue and white to not distract from our cheerleader in the water. We really wanted her to be the focal point. And then we did a little fun thing, and I don't know if you caught it. And I had seen this in my research, and I was like, we're doing this. And these are the little things that that Liz was just talking about. We put Jesus saves on one of those little life rings, and we hung it on the wall. And when the director saw it, he panned towards it, held, and then went into the pool. He started laughing. He thought it was hilarious. So I would try to do those little things. I had like a cross in the background of this one wood scene. It's some stuff you don't see, but I always look for those moments to try and do little things like that. And that one was a big hit with everybody. So I was really glad that we made it and put it on the wall.
Yeah, that was awesome. I love those things where sometimes you're at the 11th hour and you're like, you know what? Let's just nobody approved this, but we'll see on set if they like it. Yeah. Like you can take it away if they don't like
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, share with us some of your other favorite scenes, costumes, again, whether there is that sort of overlapping factor or just individually things to draw attention to.
Eve, you have to talk about the boxcar.
The boxcar was definitely an undertaking. It started as kind of this small honky tonk and it grew into this 75-foot square monstrosity you guys see on screen. It just kept growing. It's like, well, I want a kitchen. Well, there was this one shot, right, where Hub comes in, he sees Marianne, he sees Lucky, he kind of goes through the kitchen, you travel, right? It's almost like our Goodfellas shot. So we needed all of that, architecture. We had found this wonderful building in Grantville, which ended up being our landry, and it had all these mix of materials. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. What if they took over the first one and over the years grew? So it expanded. So I kind of based the philosophy of the set on that. And then it gave me the ability to introduce different types of textures, brick, concrete, stone, and kind of pepper, like plaster over and then have some of the stone revealed, which gave us a nice transition from the stage room into our pool room. And we did a lot of stuff we did some tin ceilings to cause some reflections just to give it some more depth. And we did some painted wallpaper in the pool room, anything we could do to just make it a bit more interesting. And it was a cobbling together of all the different things I had seen in my research. And then we did chevron wood walls behind the stage. That was something that I was really passionate about. And we did a couple of those by the front. And it was it was a massive undertaking. And luckily we didn't start shooting it till our third week. And we really needed that time because we were on such a full push for compound and the bond shop because those played week one. Both of those played week one, which was just very harrowing. And we did get it done. And then it was like, oh no, now we're behind on the boxcar. And then it's the scramble to get that ready. But it came together beautifully. It was being where we were really helped us decorate that space because this set decorator did a lot of shopping down there and she had worked on The Walking Dead. So she knew all the spots to hit. And we were going to Alabama or sometimes Florida to pick up certain things, but it was drivable. You could do it in a day. And it was I'm just so happy with how it came together. And then, Liz and I worked together on the uniforms and we got the logo together and we did the uniforms. And I just thought everything she did really accented our space in such a great way. It's so layered. And so unless you're staring at it, you'll miss it. I would say the sixth episode is where you really get to see the bar area because Lucky and Hub are having that conversation and you really get a sense of that part of the club, which you don't see too much in the earlier episodes. But Marianne's dressing room was another one. It had to feel like her. And for me, she's an aspiring starlet. She hasn't given up on her dream yet. So how do I show that in her space? And I found this wonderful, red damask wallpaper that was textured. It was beautiful. And I didn't know if they would go for it. And I remember showing it like, what do you guys think? Like knowing it was right, but not, having other options. And like Liz was saying, Eric is so game. And he was like, I love it. And the director loved it. Senna loved it. And I was like, oh, thank God, because I really saw it for her. Like this shows. And then we have Dolly Parton and we have Loretta Lynn, right? These are her icons, these country music icons. And I think it fit her so well. And her in that beautiful pink dress that Liz put her in, it really pops against that deep red. And then we had lots of purples and lots of like soft textures in there. I just thought it really came alive for her. So that was one of my favorite sets too in the boxcar.
That set, when you were in it, it felt so real. Sitting at that bar, Eve, I just like that. It was just amazing because we've all been in that bar. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we've
Yeah.
all been at a bar that's like just lacquered to shit, and like just so many drink stains on it from like all waterlogged, and it was just so everywhere you looked in that bar, you were just like, oh my God, yeah, that was
Thank you.
killed it.
I remember walking around towards the end before and adding, like being like, put lights around the bison head.
Yeah.
Put like just like little points because it was so the DP was a little worried. We needed a lot of lighting because they couldn't light because of that one shot. It had to exist for him. He had to have something to pull from. And I love practicals. I love doing it. But it's also that thing of like you don't want to put 8 practicals in one room. It's bizarre, right? You have to find that balance. So we found these really cool sconces that are repurposed. They're like insulators glass. And so I bought a bunch of those and we put those in the hallway and down the mine shaft, like leading to the kitchen. And then we hung like little string lights and we did the Christmas lights. And I think all that really helped bring it together. And then I really wanted a beer bottle chandelier. And we couldn't find what we wanted. So it ended up falling to my assistant art director to make it. And it was like one of the last things that went up. But I remember the director going, "Did you guys make that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "It's so good." And I'm like, like, and there it is. That's the whole point of that. But that was definitely a labor of love. I think this whole show was. There was so many interesting storylines and characters and sets. And the sets themselves, I think, were characters themselves, right? And
Yeah.
a big part of the show. It was a dream to be able to create this show and these sets, especially with this team, because I feel like everybody that worked on this was really talented and really lovely, and everybody was down, to do what needed to be done to get it done.
Yeah.
Kind of the coolest aspect of the show is that it feels like you're coming in at like season 3 of a different show, and then it just takes a total left turn, obviously, in that sort of opening scene. But I think that's a credit to everything that you're describing with how you built out these sets to have so much detail in regards to the character work and how they're informing the backstory. Did you feel like, because it almost sounds like you're the holder of the Bible, like for the story itself. Did you feel like anyone was coming to you specifically, Eve, to ask for like character advice in regards to
Sometimes, yeah,
how they shape things?
mostly the people in my department, like my set decorator, the prop master, like they were always running stuff by me because at this point I had been living with them for so long, give like what Liz said, being brought on early for like R&D and then having that extra prep. And the story changed, and I'm sure Liz can attest to this too. Like the scripts went through several iterations before the show that we have now. And so I was kind of part of that roller coaster of like, oh, now okay, now it's becoming this, and and you kind of go with it. But the characters themselves, like our hero characters, really did not shift. It was really just more the storylines and what they were doing and where they went. But yes, I definitely felt like the gatekeeper a little bit with the art department for sure.
One thing that wasn't it wasn't clear what it was going to ultimately look like was the finale demon. That change from the iteration, coming right out of the ground of, Cheryl to what she became in sort of that final fight. I remember that being something that was basically on the docket for post. And so when I was watching the show, and that could have, I remember there were some iterations of it like in research that were very, could go all kinds of different directions, in terms of just completely morphing into something that looks totally otherworldly. And her costume was something that was really, I think it was like something we tried so many different things for that character, like all kind of in the same ilk, but it was something that Eric had in his mind very early on that he wanted it to feel like this furry 70s vintagey coat. Like he just had that planted. And I was a little bit like, okay, like it was just sort of a take that he had, and then we ran with it. And I remember feeling when we wrapped, like, oh, I hope that demon turns out, so like, I know what she looked like when she was really messed up looking, and I have, whatever she looks like above that car, like, and I remember watching the episode being like, well, here we go. Like, what is this gonna look like? And the wings look like they're an extension of the fur on her coat, and there was something about that was so, I was just like, yes, Eric. Like, I think, I like, it instead of going, it really kind of made a case for the costume, if that makes sense. Because it like instead of going like, oh, now she's a black vaporous horned whatever, like, or now she looks like she's out of Diablo, or like it was just our specific Southern Gothic bartender, waitress, demon, and I just, when I realized that, like, wow, the texture on the wings is the texture on the trim on the coat, I was just, it really was like, and that's why I work with Eric Olson. You know what I mean? Like, that choice was so, like, on the one hand, minimal and kind of brave in its way, and on the other hand, just kind of made that whole trajectory of her costume work. And yeah, so that's just something, it's funny because like film and TV, like you do what you do during production and then you send it off. And, especially costume designers then wait, a year and see the finished product. And there are elements, especially in this specific show, that really affect the costume, so much post. And we had a great post collaborator, post supervisor, and visual effects supervisor who was on the ground with us, the whole time, who was amazing, Lou. And so, yeah, it's nice to then kind of watch and be like, ah, yes, it came together.
We had to create a bunch of demon art for the lore that is in the show. So we had a concept designer that Eric had worked with before on Carnival Row and some of his other big mystical shows. And she was fantastic. So we had to have a water demon and an air demon, right? All these things that correspond to the cans you see in the seventh episode, and the whole mystery that surrounds, the mystery surrounding Hub, that he's trying to figure out what Lilith is doing. And anyway, so for me, that was just one added challenge on top of all the other stuff that I'm normally doing, is like, well, we need to create this artwork. It has to look authentic and old. And then we shot it practically on the computers, right? So we had to have designed on a timeline for that. And then in addition to that, we had like all the maps. We had a lot of interactive graphics that were tied to it, right? And wiki articles and things. So the writers were writing that for us. And then we were finding images, and we needed like an old abbey with a pentagram around it. I mean, there was just no short. I get a script and go, really? All right. Okay. Like, let me figure this out, like, let me see. And we didn't really have the time towards the end, especially, to create that stuff completely, right? The rounds of revisions and the time it would take to illustrate. So we needed to work with some sort of stock images. And luckily at this point, stock does have a lot of vintage illustrations that are now clear, that we were able to piggyback off of, and then modify those and work with those. So that was really helpful. And don't get me wrong, I would love to design stuff from scratch always, but if you only have like 2 weeks to turn it around and it's on air, that gets really tricky. So then you kind of got to take some of those shortcuts, like that Liz was saying, that we learned on the smaller shows we did coming up.
When you talk about all this investment in the history, and then kind of, Liz, we were talking about where these characters end, without getting into specific spoilers, what can you guys tell us about a season 2 of this show?
What I can tell you right now is that we're waiting to hear if we're going to get greenlit. It's my understanding that, they want data from the show once it airs to make that decision. I don't know, Liz, if you've heard anything else, but I mean, I'm very hopeful for it. And my sense is we have a good shot at it. I'm fingers crossed, but that's my understanding.
That's as much as I know.
I gotta say, I have a bit of a bone to pick with Amazon these days, and Netflix as well, because Eve, as you referenced, they wait for the data to come in from a season before continuing oftentimes a story that doesn't necessarily feel complete with the original release. Does that hang over the set as well, with this sense that we may or may not get to continue because you really don't know if there's going to be more?
Um,
I mean,
I
oh,
yeah,
sorry, please.
I was just gonna say I was so busy right up until the end that I mean, all I was thinking about, honestly, towards the end was like, I want to get home to my animals and my husband. I got married in October and I left in January to shoot the show. So, I got married and like a couple months later took off. I did go home a few weekends, but it was hard being away in that first year. And so I was pretty focused on just getting home and resting and catching up on all those things. I don't think the second season stuff really started to hit for me until like maybe the fall. And I was like, oh, I wonder, so for me, no, not on the set, not I didn't have the bandwidth to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I I think that I mean same, and also this was post strikes, and so there was such a joy to work, and like Eve, a lot of my department what had worked on The Walking Dead, which had just ended, so it was like everybody was happy to get back to work. And it's funny though, as you go, I'm sure you find this too, Eve, or I think you would too, like sometimes I have these like moments where I'm like, season two, we're gonna do this differently, or like I make a little, like I have a little notes thing, like season two for this show, I need this instead of this, or you know what I mean? And I'm just kind of like racking my brain in hopes of it and like trying to make decisions in rap and, X, Y, and Z that would benefit a season two, But yeah, I mean, there's so much time between when we wrap and when it comes out to when it might be a season two that it feels, yeah, it feels far away to think about that, I think, while we're going.
Yeah.
And also, it was a crazy year for me. I couldn't believe how this worked out. I like wrapped the Bondsman and then immediately flew to Toronto for Twisted Metal too.
Oh, wow.
And there was no overlap at all. Like I didn't even have to be like, can I? Blah blah blah. No, it was literally like done, and everyone's like goodbye, and then yeah, which was amazing to not have overlap, but also like, yeah, it was crazy, very crazy year, but amazing, yeah.
Well, we can't let you go without hearing what it was like working with Kevin Bacon.
The best.
I do have his picture on my wall, so
Well, okay, so I mean, it is an intimidating remit to be told you're going to put Kevin Bacon in jeans. Like, because the man, in addition to being like an iconic American, iconic international star, is jeans. Like some of his most iconic roles, he like defined. I can't tell you how many times in a lookbook that I'm doing for any show, it's about, oh, and this was Kevin Bacon wearing jeans, and this is the fit of jeans that I like. And so like that always hung, I was so excited. And then also like, oh my, like how am I'm gonna show up after like, all the costume designers he's worked with for decades and be like, here's my thought about jeans, like but he was so involved in the preparatory process, like from a producer standpoint. And the way I kind of like, I would have, conversations with Eric when I was starting to think about different characters. But what I would really do is just like put together this like pitch email basically of like, okay, Kitty, here's where I'm at with Kitty, and here's the images I'm thinking of, and here's where my brain is going on this, and like send it out to, apartment heads, Eric and Kevin. And Kevin was really reading and responding and involved and so generous with his time in that way and available. And it was a joy for me to work with, like, dream joy. And I think part of the reason is because he made himself so available and involved and like also complimentary prior to even landing for his fitting, and that is not something that you always are, actors have, first of all, they're busy. And second of all, like, it's just not something that I've always experienced, and that really helped for me to like not only put myself at ease, but also just like be like, yes, we're on the same page, we're collaborating, like we're all here making the same thing, and we want it to do the best it can, and now let's talk about jeans. You know what I mean? So for me, it was like just a highlight of my short career so far.
I had a similar experience. Kevin joined us on the first scout in August, and that was
That is wild.
yeah,
That's
it really
amazing.
was. It was like, oh, okay. Normally I'm just here with, the producers. And so now here's Kevin Bacon. So it added an interesting dynamic to the scouts, but he was really just listening and kind of paying attention. He wasn't really weighing in too much. I ended up seated across from him the first night at dinner on a very long table. And I'm like, oh no. I was like, oh no, like, yeah, here we go. And he's from Philly too. So I literally just started talking about Philly stuff with him, like as a way to break the ice. And he's so relatable and wonderful and easy to talk to and kind. So it was very easy. Like he put me at ease very quickly. It wasn't as scary as I made it out to be in my head. And then as we moved through the process, like Liz said, he was on all the emails with the initial concepts with the sets and plans. And I did some animations for the sets that we presented to the network where I took like the SketchUps I had made and I animated them. So it's like a little video and he really loved that. And he was very complimentary. I sent pictures for the cheerleader bedroom set actually, which was one of my favorite swings that we did. And he wrote back, wow, Eve, it was just to get that kind of email from Kevin is pretty amazing, given all the things he's worked on and all the things he's seen in his career. He was very supportive and complimentary. And once we started shooting, he was involved a little less for me from my standpoint, but like Liz, obviously you're working with him all the time, but he was always on the emails and, would respond when needed. And I found it a really wonderful experience. It was my first time working with a star of that caliber as a producer. And I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome.
So the big takeaway from this entire interview is you want to work with Eric Olson and you want to work with Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
If anybody, that is the takeaway. If you're presented with either of those options, it's a yes.
Yeah.
Like I don't even, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
think about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, then fingers crossed for season 2, just to get you guys all back together. On that note, we're going to call it a wrap. Oh, I'm really glad you guys could both join us for this. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For having us.
Thank you,
I
guys.
learned so much in this actually for me. Like, we're always just like passing each other and be like, you good? Yeah, you good? Okay, what's this color? Oh, okay, goodbye. Yeah. But yeah, it's great. Thank you so much.
That's cool.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, blowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Ladies, where next are we going to see your work?
Hopefully Bondsman season 2.
Twisted Metal season 2. I'm not sure exactly when, but I believe they did say this year. Yeah.
Exciting.
Wild ride.
First season, yeah, it was so fun.
So fun.
Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate it. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Our fan recognition promotion continues. If you send me a picture of yourself in a Below the Line t-shirt, I'll thank you by name on the podcast. Other ways you can help the show. First, give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcasts. And second, share a positive review with your friends, because that's how new listeners find us. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.